Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Dynamic Neurotech podcast. Today, we've got Chay Carter with us, and he has background in recruiting in the neurotechnology industry. Why don't you give us a better background about yourself and how you came to be where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Robert. I have been recruiting for 20 years, originally in London, graduated from college with a psychology degree, was umming and ahhing about how to take that degree to the next level or maybe continue studies, and realized pretty soon that London was a very expensive place to live and needed a job, and ended up getting talked into recruiting and started in investment banking originally. Did it for a few years before moving to the States in 2015, where I ended up working in renewable energy recruitment and the private equity sector associated with that. I always kept a keen interest in psychology, and particularly alternative mental health treatments. So neurotechnology was often a discussion in those courses. So TMS and TDCS at the time, or TES, were probably the fringe topics that we discussed. But always found it fascinating. And through my work in investment banking and hedge funds, private equity, renewable energy, always kind of kept a keen interest in that market as a cutting edge technological industry. Fast forward to about 6, 7 years ago, I moved to the West Coast, was given the opportunity to launch a couple of life sciences businesses in recruitment. And again, neurotech was always fascinating, but it was always a bit of a hobby, a research hobby, kind of keeping up to date with developments and so forth. And really from a mental health and neurodegenerative perspective. And then, 3 or 4 years ago, lucky enough to kind of be able to really take that on and take ownership of a desk fully associated to neurotechnology. And then 18 months ago, managed to set up my own business because I realized there was a big gap in the startup world in neurotechnology, and companies needing, startups want to work with startups. So able to really dedicate all my time to the neurotechnology startup world.
It sounds like you've had some adventures along the way and got involved in, as you mentioned, lots of different industries before settling here on Neurotech. And I wondered if you could kind of double click into that a little bit further. What really drew you in this direction? Was it mainly that psychology and neurotechnology interests from before that had been driving you in this direction, or were there other factors that were kind of all merging together to push you into this field?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think really the mental health space was particularly interesting, and it's the association with psychology, but also just as a child of the 80s, we're seeing so much evolution of technology as we grow up, and the integration of technology and software into our everyday lives was really fascinating. So what started off as a little bit of an interest, and over the years reading more about it, and then starting to read about brain computer interfaces before they became a thing, starting to read about the more traditional neuromodulation markets, and alternative treatments for pain management, for instance, let alone the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's treatments of deep brain stimulation. And then even just over the years, seeing ads pop up on social media for vagus nerve stimulation devices and so forth. And then more recently, over the last few years, the re-emergence of EEG technology, and all of this stuff sort of kind of made sense to me as someone who was interested in technology and grew up in a world of rapidly changing technology. That it was nice to kind of piece it all together over the last few years. But it was really just pretty came from someone that was deeply interested in weird fringe technology, and wanted to kind of keep up to date with the latest things, and the brain being the final frontier of what we're trying to crack, and seeing how that technology has evolved over the years, again just from a hobby perspective really.
This field is really growing lately, and these last few years are the perfect time to be building businesses in this space. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast today, I think most of our podcast will be about the field of neurotechnology at large and also about your new platform, reccy Neuro. But you have a lot of other interesting things going on that you're involved with. You're the founder and neurotalent specialist at Carter Sciences. You also publish a really interesting neurotechnology newsletter, and then you run an interview series focused on interviewing neurotech founders and industry figures. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about some of these initiatives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I launched the headhunting business, Carter Sciences, imaginatively named Carter Sciences, the goal was just to work with these boutique businesses that needed help and be flexible in my payment structures to help these companies hire the right people they needed. As I mentioned earlier about like the interest in it as a hobby, there's tons of research going into it, right? As we're building a business, like what's my business development strategy? How am I going to find out about new companies? Who's fundraising? What's happening with the regulatory and clinical side? And I soon realized I had about 50 tabs open on my laptop at any given time. And it was all just articles and interviews and so forth. And I soon realized that there's lots of really amazing newsletters out there, lots of opinion pieces, lots of blogs and so forth around neurotech. A newsletter in its purest form of just an accumulation of the latest news sent out like a newspaper essentially was missing. And I realized I had all the information there. And a guy that I used to work with, a former colleague of mine who ended up being my co-founder of reccy with me, was working on automation tools. So he helped me piece something together with using all these articles. And then we built up this network, which is close to 2,000 subscribers now on the newsletter. And it is published every 2 weeks, just a real long list of every single neurotech news item across funding and finance, regulatory, clinical, commercial launches and collaborations and hiring. And it's just been a really, really, I think, positively received item in the industry. There's like I said, there's lots of bits of information out there, but I just wanted to bring it together for everybody. And then from there, Sophie Valentine at Neurotech X asked me to do some writing for the guys at medium.com. And not being a neuroscientist myself and not working directly in the industry as a biomedical engineer, I didn't want to sit there and try and write opinion pieces about a market that I'll never truly be an expert in. But what I do know well is founders of businesses, the pain points, the growth trajectory, and I have a deep passion for learning about new businesses and new angles in the industry. So I decided to reach out to some of the founders I knew and have done a tremendous set of interviews so far with some really interesting people. There's about 3 or 4 in the pipeline at the moment to come out still. And then on the back end of that, I had loads of people reach out to me about companies I was interviewing, companies on the newsletter, and then how they had never heard of them. And how do I keep track of these companies and who's hiring? So I started to put together a jobs letter with the help of Max, the co-founder at reccy. And we soon realized there was a massive opportunity and gap in the market here for a job board specific to neurotech. And it's more than a job board. It's also like a market data platform. It's got hundreds of companies on it. It's got loads of news accumulated from the newsletter that I make as well, but also pulled in data from across the internet. So people use it for lots of different reasons. We had 1,000 people sign up in the first few weeks, and every week we're having hundreds more. But yeah, I really wanted to create an ecosystem for neurotechnology, and headhunting being the start of it. It's actually kind of the final point now. We've got the job board at the beginning and the interviews and the news in between, so everyone can keep up to date. And then headhunting comes at the end of that process, really. But yeah, it's all about trying to bring what is a small but rapidly growing industry together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's pretty cool how all of these various things that you're working on are a bit cohesive. They all kind of help each other out. What I really like about some of them is you're providing really great resources for people who are either involved in this field or interested in this field. And yeah, I'm always looking forward to seeing your newsletter come out or your next interview. To zoom out a little bit though and look at the field of neurotechnology at large, it sits at the intersection of many different fields from engineering, neuroscience, data science, and clinical and regulatory, to name a few. From your perspective, having a lot of experience on the talent side of the industry, which of these disciplines has been the hardest to find good people in that want to go into neurotechnology? And also, just where do you feel that some of the biggest gaps, talent-wise, in the field lie at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that comes up a lot in conversations. And I see a lot of trends happening in the market all the time. I think things change all the time, right? I think there are challenges in every industry, depending on the specificity of a skill set of a requirement. But typically, if I zoom out, I look at the industry and go, there are a lot of people at the moment focused on data science, machine learning, AI. A lot of EEG decoding, a lot of speech decoding going on at the moment in the BCI space. There's a lot of talent there. And I think what's also interesting about that market is often it's, on the software side, there's an opportunity to work remotely. So this is a diverse talent pool, really, really highly talented, very, very well educated, super specific and specialized in what they do as well. What's interesting, and this is something I saw in my other industries too, when I was working in renewable energy, is the electrical engineering market has got a huge gap, because it's so specific to individual requirements for each company. Everyone's trying to do something a little bit different. There is obviously an on-site requirement a lot of the time with electrical engineering, as I'm sure you can imagine, dealing with hardware. And it's such an important skill set, but it's maybe not as sexy as some of the software engineering or AI and ML stuff, which is like the hottest topic right now. So it's often a neglected skill set. And there's lots of industries obviously looking for electrical engineers at the moment too. And I think you may not specialize in neuroscience and electrical engineering, but your skill set might be perfect for that. But some of the exciting stuff that's happening in neurotech right now is probably at really, really early stage businesses that maybe can't pay as much as some of the other big tech businesses out there that are also looking for electrical engineers. So we've got this big skill gap, I think, in the electrical side, partly down to location, partly down to maybe it's not the most appealing side of it, but yeah, there's probably 7 or 8 really early stages companies at the top of my head in neurotech doing some of the most cutting edge work possible that are really, really struggling to find electrical engineers right now.
Well, first off, thank you for sharing that with us and going into very specific detail about what actually might be driving some of those gaps that you mentioned. And pivoting over to talk a little bit more about the platform that you built, reccy Neuro, was there a moment or a hire or even a specific position that you were headhunting for that made you realize that generic platforms, think of maybe like a LinkedIn or an Indeed, were not necessarily built for neurotech and maybe not optimized for what people in this field or what people in this industry might need in a platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think personally, as a recruiter, I stopped advertising on LinkedIn, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. I think there was, obviously a really, really buoyant job market, to put it politely, during COVID. And job applications were getting hundreds. Anybody could work remotely at the time. There was a period where interest rates were really low. Anyone could work remote. And then all of a sudden the market just sort of exploded. And then it's retracted massively since then. I never really probably recovered, but I think there's a number of different stats I've heard recently about applying for jobs. And the first one is that I think on average, people are applying to 700 jobs before they get an offer now on job boards like LinkedIn, which sounds like an insane number. I might have to verify that. Another one I heard is 1 in 4 applicants are bots. So we're just getting inundated on job boards with irrelevant applications. But hey, there might be 700 people who are right for your job. That's fantastic. I really hope there are. And you get to pick the best and or whatnot. But the fact that there are 1 in 4 bots is really misleading, and this is just a troubling marketplace to be in. So as a recruiter, obviously, like I pride myself in headhunting and going out and finding people and presenting 5 to 10 that maybe the best candidates in the market. I have clients who have posted jobs and got 700 applicants. And they've come to me and said, "Can you help me go through them?" And it's almost like the reverse effect. And for me, it's not really like about being a recruiter and selling against that. It's about understanding that companies can't always afford recruiters, or early stage businesses often don't have an applicant tracking system, so they're just getting like, I use 700 as an example, in their inbox, and then you have to spend the man hours going through that. And as a recruiter, and again, a conversation I've had probably about 4 or 5 times just today, recruiters get very, very good at speed reading resumes. You understand what the person's education looks like and what the last couple of jobs look like, and you can really, really piece it together. But when you're looking at highly technical people, like electrical engineers, for instance, you have to really, really take your time. So anything over 100 applicants for a job is just difficult. And also you have applicants who are expecting an answer too. So there was like a lack of transparency from both sides. Candidates think they're more qualified than they are. Maybe they are the best candidate, but if you're applicant number 625, will your resume even get looked at? So it's a really, really troubling marketplace at the moment. And it was just like that, just a combination of issues altogether really made us put our head together. I was working a job actually specifically where I made a quick post and it was shared by a couple of people about a machine learning engineer. And I had some incredibly talented PhD candidates reach out who were saying, "Hey, I'm graduating in a couple of months. I'm doing this exact thing right now in my research program. I'd love to have a conversation." And just realizing that these are guys who have never probably applied for jobs or been in a normal workforce before, weren't really sure how to, first of all, present themselves on LinkedIn, present themselves in their resume either. And there's zero chance they were going to get their profiles to the top of the pile, even though they were the best candidates for the job. So obviously working with me, I was able to help them do that, but realized that that's just one example. How do I create a platform to allow everyone to kind of know where they rank? Are they the best of the best? And why the clients can see the 625th applicant at the top of the pile because they're the best applicant, as opposed to having to sift through 600 more.
First off, I appreciate you walking us through some of the background to why you decided to team up with your co-founder and build reccy Neuro. And I was wondering, could you also go into a bit of the early stages of the founding story of this platform? Were there any roadblocks along the way? What surprised you about more so building a product versus previously, and I guess still currently running more of like a service-based business with Carter
Yeah.
Sciences?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think when me and Max connected about this, and we were talking about the jobs letter, and we are like, "What are we doing?" You know what I mean? What's the problem here? And Max was telling me about some of the work he'd done with other companies where he'd built screening like algorithms. So AI companies were receiving thousands of applicants. Again, maybe 20 of them were amazing for the job, but you couldn't find them. So he built this ranking system for these companies, and he put it onto their applicant tracking system, and it helped them rank their candidates. And we were like, well, what if we did this for the industry, rather than just individual companies? Why don't we build a system which, first of all, the main thing we wanted to target was making sure that it was neurotech specific. So your specialism was emphasized and highlighted. So we built a tagging system. So when you upload your profile onto LinkedIn, we're talking about what department you're in. So are you in research? Are you in clinical, regulatory? And then what technology you've worked on, which is obviously the key defining factor a lot of the time. Is it traditional spinal cord stimulators, deep brain stimulators, or is it, EEG, wearable BCIs? Is it neural dust? Is it really cutting edge stuff? And then also indications too, because a lot of the time people get into the specific industry because they're family or personally affected by something, or they have a deep interest in it. So we see that a lot in the epilepsy market, for instance, neurodegenerative as well. In mental health, this affects absolutely everybody in some way. And so we wanted to make sure that people are kind of tagged in those three categories. And so what it does is when you, as a candidate, you create a profile, all of a sudden you have your LinkedIn, your resume, any research papers you want to put on there, and it understands who you are in a three-dimensional way and can match you up with companies and specific jobs too. And clients do the same thing. So we're making sure that everyone is super specific. Everyone is like very, very focused on neurotech, and we know who they are. And the goal really was to cut out the bots by doing that. You're not going to get 200 applicants for a job. If you do want 200 applicants for the job, then there are generic job boards out there for that. But you might get 10 applicants for a job. You might get 20. Some of our jobs we just get 1 or 2 applicants for, and they're bloody brilliant. And sometimes we get 4 or 5, and they're not quite right because there's often geographic requirements and so forth. But what we really wanted to do is sort of lift the veil on what a job board can actually do and make sure that companies are really focused on there. So roadblocks we've had so much amazing feedback. The first thing we did was design the template. And then I utilized my network to get founders of businesses, technologists in the industry, candidates, research scientists to sit down with us. We'll give them a walkthrough and let them just tear it apart. So we had a number of conversations with people, heads of talent, CTOs, CEOs, who were just saying, why is that there? Why is that there? You've missed out this technology. Even to this day, we're still finding things of like, can't believe we didn't have this one specific technology in there or this one department title. And it's just been a really amazing learning curve. But the feedback we've had from candidates is that finally they have access to like this lack of noise where they can just sit there and see the entire neurotech industry in front of them. And companies too can sit there and post jobs and understand what the landscape looks like because they can interact directly with the community without running the risk of having their inboxes full. So yeah, we're building a fully interactive platform, and it is become more than a job board, but it also ties into what kind of scientists do too. Because I think most companies will advertise a job prior to talking to a recruiter. And the idea of the way the recruitment process usually works is let's discuss with our immediate network. Let's ask our friends of our friends. Let's put a job posting out because that's going to cost us money. And then worst case scenario, unless it's a confidential senior search, worst case scenario, let's reach out to a recruiter. So for us now, we're kind of like wedging ourselves in before speaking to a recruiter. Carter Sciences still offers a service. We offers a discounted service to companies if they use the platform as well. And I've got 20 years of headhunting experience, so it all ties in nicely. And we're just trying to make it as cost effective as possible, but also as robust as possible for companies.
And I can definitely understand those synergies that you mentioned kind of between Carter Sciences and reccy Neuro. And then also really glad to hear about kind of that feedback loop that you set up with people in the industry to help mold the platform into what it is that the industry and the clients and the candidates might need. And I guess to double click on the placement process within reccy Neuro, I was checking out the website and it mentioned that it gets smarter with every placement. And I was wondering, what does that feedback loop actually look like in practice? Does it kind of like feedback into the algorithm, or is it more so strategically, like as placements are happening, the team is discussing new strategies and things like that? Would love to hear more about how that loop works.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, from a technical perspective, it absolutely feeds back into the algorithm. We are looking at consistently improving the matching. It's the key part of it. The matching is quite complex too, because it's not just skill sets. It's not a word search. We're talking about geography, we're talking about tenure, we're talking about educational analysis too. And it's all, it's not just candidates and companies, it's specific job descriptions, and specific resumes with research papers and stuff associated too. So there's a lot of data that goes into each search, and each individual placement and each individual interview request even is analyzed and fed back into the algorithm. But also from me and Max's perspective too, we're constantly looking at different ways that we can improve the quality of like a job description, like a company profile. We're automatically enriching data all the time. When news comes in, for instance, about a fundraise, we're enriching that about a company, so we now know what stage it's at. We're constantly thinking about headcount changes too, and how that impacts a certain company's profile. But we really want to make sure that every single little bit of information that's fed into the company, we're pulling data from multiple sources, and we're also we're helping candidates generate new resumes, for instance, as well, to pull in more information out of their experience too. And we're also helping companies pull out more information of their company profiles using AI and different sources. All those little bits of data are constantly enriching the platform, and obviously we're looking at new sources all the time of how do we reinvest back into the ecosystem, and generate more accurate data around candidate salaries and regulatory news in real time and so forth. So it's all part of the placements are one part of it, but all the data that's being fed into it is all part of it as well. And, adding new companies all the time, adding new different job titles and different skill sets. Like I said, with the electrical engineering piece in particular, the system is learning about different types of electrical engineering, different types of circuit boards and so forth. So it's constantly improving that matching just through adding new job descriptions all the time as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, sounds like you guys have lots and lots of different data sources feeding into this and helping the system learn and get better and better. And kind of in that same vein, I was wondering, how do you guys solve for edge cases? For example, like if a candidate may be a really great fit for a certain job, but maybe doesn't map neatly to a certain taxonomy, or maybe somebody with military or DARPA background where a lot of their specific experience might be classified, or even another example could be somebody who has a good background in electrical engineering, but maybe it's in a completely different industry or a different area of technology. Just wondering if you could touch a little bit on how edge cases like the ones described there would get handled by the platform.
Absolutely. So on the industry experience, it's fascinating actually, because another part of my Carter Sciences function is career advisory work. And I'm currently working with someone who's just coming out of the military, but was working on AI and neurotechnology within the military. And I'm working with him, basically I'm coaching him on getting him to think how hiring teams view a profile, because he has a lot of military job titles, which don't mean anything in the corporate world. So it's about trying to incorporate that into the system too, and not just me being able to give guidance. So it's picking up on what job responsibilities are. With classified information, sure. So that's why we make sure we're pulling in from multiple different locations. I know people who are in the military who have publications which are public, and they can pull those in, and it helps bring a broader job title. But I think with the tagging process at the start, really helps create that three-dimensional profile. So this person in particular is an R&D project and program manager. They've worked in EEG technology. They've worked in a few classified projects that they can't talk about, and they have no idea about what they are. But some of the stuff they can talk about, and some of the more mainstream technologies are there for his selection, and even some of the indications too. With regards to candidates, and this is again a conversation we had recently with a BCI manufacturer who was talking about, we often hire for mechanical engineers outside of neurotech. And for us, that's absolutely fine. The tagging system is only part of it. That's why we pull in from multiple places. So the resume, the LinkedIn will still highlight those core skills, and we'll be able to match the candidate up. And even if the score comes back and says, you're a 40% fit for some other mechanical engineering roles, if the job description highlights specific a lack of need of neurotechnology experience and just technical skills, it'll still match you highly against that resume. and put you to the top of the list if you're right for it. If the job description says you must come from a neuroscience background or have worked in medical devices previously, then that's going to work against you. And that's exactly the point of the profile too. But typically we want people to be matched based on their resume and their skills. And maybe they won't ever apply for a neurotech job on the reccy neuro platform again until there's another one without that requirement. But we really need, we want people to be matched in the best way possible. And we want companies to use this as a holistic tool too.
Yeah, totally understood. Looking ahead, wondering if you could touch on maybe some goals that you have for Carter Sciences as well as reccy Neuro over the next couple of years, and also any goals for like some of these other initiatives within the neurotech space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the moment, like if I think about like the last 18 months, like Carter Sciences came first, and the newsletter, then the interviews, and then the job board. And I think what's really going to happen is the job board is going to be the leading function of the wider business, and Carter Sciences is going to be at the back end where companies will, maybe again, bear in mind it's a job board, so not everyone's going to be applying for jobs all the time. We do our best to drive traffic towards it. We promote it online to our network and our community. And I have, people share it all the time. So we get great profiles on that platform. But, as we know, not all jobs are job board jobs. A head of sales, for instance, is probably like a headhunting job. But companies often, if they want to try it, that's absolutely fine. So what we try and do is funnel that through to Carter Sciences afterwards at a discounted rate because we've used the platform and we have access to all the data and so forth, and we can go from there. So I think that's a natural progression of where we're going. In the job board, the interviews, I'm writing articles on my Substack too about the industry. That's just going to continue to grow. And the goal for reccy is to become the main central hub of data and hiring and news for Neurotech. We've seen a great interest so far in like the first quarter of launching it. We've got some clients signed up already. We expect to double that in the second quarter. By the end of the year, we'd love to have over 50 companies signed up, but we already have over 1,000 candidates using it, and lots of companies using it, not all paying right now, but lots using trials and giving us great feedback. But there's some amazing fundraisers happening at the moment in Neurotech, and companies are coming to us and saying, we would love for this to be our central hub for when we start to rapidly hire throughout this year. So we're expecting a big influx of activity. And yeah, we just want reccy Neuro to become that main hub. So, we've got a pretty detailed neurotech market map of how many companies are out there globally, and we're trying to expand it outside of the US right now. We have some clients in Europe and in Israel as well, actually, right now. But yeah, lots more work to be done. But the goal is reccy Neuro to be the focus of all of it and everything else to kind of expand out.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like exciting times ahead. And as someone who really follows the neurotech field closely, if we're just looking at the field or the industry at large, do you have any maybe short-term predictions for the field of neurotechnology, perhaps over the next few years? What do you kind of see coming down the pipeline, or what do you expect over these next few years?
Yeah, the conversations I've been having very recently, and pretty, spotting trends of raises that have happened as well, is that there's sort of three main areas I think that are getting a lot of attention. I think the mental health FDA approved device market is going to be very interesting with Neuraleaf and Flow Neuroscience in particular. Getting FDA approval, slightly different, obviously, approval processes. I think Flow is probably leading the way there and have been doing some amazing work over the last few years in Europe. I think that mental health market is going to change dramatically. And I think we'll see probably more entrants into that space too with different types of technologies. But really the TDCS device with Flow, I think it's going to change how we view mental health treatment in not just the US, but globally as well. I think the neurodegenerative market too. And I think both of those markets, mental health and neurodegenerative, probably are the hot topics because the efficacy of the pharmaceutical industry in that space isn't great. So we're going to see a lot of new technologies entering that space. Cognito Therapeutics with their Alzheimer's device raising 100 million, I think, last week. There's loads of amazing startups in that space too. I think the BCI space obviously is very exciting, but pretty a long way from commercialization. But I think the neurodegenerative space is going to be fascinating and probably see a lot of developments this year in that. A lot of it, I think, will come down to decoding of brain data. And it's probably leads me into my next one, which is the reemergence of EEG. I wrote an article about this on my Substack, and it's not just about the medical device space. It's about the EEG market and the consumer market, making it more accessible to people, and how I personally think that the next huge wearable market will be the first company that cracks the brain data space and something that is wearable, convenient. You can have it on all the time. We both got, well, I've got my headphones in. I think, do you want to wear headphones all day, every day? Probably not. Do you want to track your brain data like you would with an Aura ring all day, every day? Absolutely. So what's that hardware going to look like? How's that going to change? We've seen some big raises and some exciting introductions with Atlas and Temple and Iden, NextSense and NeuroX. I mean, I'm probably missing a few now, but I think there's a really, really exciting set of developments in that space about to come. And whoever cracks that commercially is gonna go into big and beautiful things. I think there's also Apple who have a patent out on a EEG earphone. So maybe they end up buying a few of those companies. We'll see. But I think it's going to be the main thing. And it's all brain related data and stimulation. So it's going to be a fascinating 2026, I think.
And maybe zooming out a little bit more, do you have any predictions or thoughts for the long-term future of neurotech, perhaps over the next 20 years or so?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there was a natural split in the industry, I think, a few years ago, where there was a big emphasis towards wearable devices and non-invasive devices anyway. And from that came obviously the medical device industry, but also the direct-to-consumer market. And I think a lot of companies direct to consumer are bootstrapped, and they're maybe criticized by the medical device industry for not having clinical validation, clinical credibility. I think that's changing a little bit now. There's a little bit more of a synergy between those types of industries. But on the other side of that branch is the BCI industry, which is fascinating. We're a long way away from commercialization now, I think, like realistically 5 years. But I think there's, pretty much 10 years. But I think there's a lot of work to be done on both sides. But the reality is we'll probably see this emergence of these type of devices together, like a precision neuroscience with a above the skull, under the skin type electrode. We'll see a direct-to-consumer type BCI device, which isn't a wearable. It is a sort of minimally invasive device, which I personally believe will, maybe help us regulate mood. Certainly be analyzing our brain waves at all times and maybe can stimulate and regulate them. I wouldn't be surprised if we have apps where we can say, hey, I'd like to focus now, and you turn up the focus dial on your BCI. But there's also probably no coincidence that Elon Musk is also trying to build robots too, and the BCI race and the robotics race are probably going to go hand in hand at some point, and that'll be a very interesting place too. That's pretty more than 20 years down the line. But I do think the race to a consumer-focused BCI is probably where we're going, whether we like it or not. I think there's also no coincidence that the AI billionaire group are all investing in the neurotech space at the moment. Obviously, some tremendous work to be done there, but also a lot of work focused on understanding the brain, which is going to be critical in achieving AGI. So lots of different things happening, I think, but I think all with the same goal, an AGI-focused BCI.
As you mentioned, a lot of different industries here going hand in hand with artificial intelligence, neurotechnology, robotics. If you zoom out enough, they all start to become a bit interrelated. Definitely, I'm super interested and excited to see what this field looks like over those time frames. And who knows, maybe some of these predictions very well might come true.
Yeah, I hope so. And I also hope not, but we'll see. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I had any additional questions to ask you today. I just wanted to open up the floor to you if you had any closing thoughts or anything you wanted to leave the audience with.
Yeah, look, I think the job market is tough right now, right? I think that's the reality of it. Clients and candidates often agree. We have a pretty scary jobs report came out for February, I think. And I know that obviously affects different industries more heavily than ours. But I think we're in an interesting place where there's a tremendous amount of talent and everyone's struggling to get noticed. And startups are the same as candidates leaving education. I'm always open to having conversations with clients, companies, candidates. Would love to share stories with people about what we can achieve with reccy Neuro. I think we're all working together and facing the same direction, trying to grow great businesses and great products. So, trying to solve some of life's biggest challenges. So yeah, let's all work together and get this done. And happy to share some stories about reccy Neuro if people need to hear more.